I'm going to talk about a technique called tongue slaps or slap tonguing, also known as pizzicato on the flute. If any of you play the clarinet or the saxophone, you know that this technique of tongue slaps also exists on those two instruments. But on the flute, tongue slap sounds literally like the pizzicato that you hear on a string instrument. So thus, we sometimes call this technique the pizzicato on the flute. And it's a really cool technique. It sounds something like this. It is a very effective technique. It works in basically any dynamic. You can play quite quietly, or if you want it louder, it can work. Although it never really goes super loud, and it doesn't project too much. So I think it's best to write for the flute, or use this technique for the flute in solo situation for the flute, or in a situation where the flute is not playing with too many other instruments, or you're simply not going to be able to hear this technique cutting through a big orchestra, for example. The other interesting thing about the slap tonguing or pizzicato is that it works much better in the low register and not so good past the middle octave E flat, as with many other techniques or extended techniques on the flute. So it sort of works like this. If I start from the low C, so as you can see, if I go past the middle E flat, it just drops back down to its low octave. So it won't really work very well if you write for a high D, for example. Compared to the pitch of the high D, that fingering is not going to produce a high D pizzicato sound on the flute. Now, the pizzicato works just as well on bigger flutes like alto. Maybe it works even better on the alto than on the regular flute. It also works pretty well on the piccolo. Although, of course, just like on a regular C flute, this technique doesn't really work if you write it beyond the E flat fingering for either of the two instruments that I just mentioned as well.